In May of 2013, the lake gave up a body. For nearly 100 years, Lake Superior had kept her secret, locked in darkness, buried in cold that preserves steel like a tomb. Then the sonar struck something massive, 30 miles. That was all that separated the Henry B. Smith from safety when she vanished into the white hurricane of 1913. When the image sharpened on the screen, there was no mystery about what they were seeing. The hull was torn in two. Iron ore spilled across the lakebed like shrapnel. The bow and stern lay broken, silent, final. No distress call survived. No witness returned. No man lived to explain what happened. But ships do not simply disappear. They are driven by deadlines, by pressure, by the fear of failure, by the belief that steel can conquer water. What happened on that November afternoon? What decision carried that captain forward when others turned back? And how did a modern freighter die within sight of land? Because the Henry B. Smith was not alone. That storm swallowed ships by the hour. It capsized giants. It erased crews. It turned Great Lake into graveyards. November has a name on the Great Lakes. Sailors call it the November Gale. Others call it something darker, the Witch of November. It is not superstition. It is pattern. By late autumn, the lakes still hold summer's heat. Surface waters remain deceptively warm while Arctic air begins pushing south from Canada. At the same time, moist air surges north from the Gulf. When those air masses collide over nearly 94,000 square miles of open water, powerful low-pressure systems form, deepen rapidly, and move fast. The Great Lakes, vast enough to behave like inland seas, become storm engines capable of producing hurricane-force winds. That is why November is the deadliest month. On November 6th, 1913, a low-pressure system formed over western Lake Superior. By Friday, November 7th, red and white hurricane warning lanterns were raised, a rare and serious signal. But forecasting in 1913 was primitive. Telegraph and telephone lines across Michigan and Wisconsin failed under snow and wind. Warnings were delayed, fragmented, or never received. The first storm system moved east across Lake Superior into Lake Michigan. To seasoned captains, it appeared to be a severe but familiar three-day gale. Winds were strong, but not unprecedented. In some areas, barometric pressure even rose briefly, giving false reassurance that the worst had passed. It had not. On Sunday, November 9th, a second storm surged north and collided with the first over Lake Huron. The result became known as the White Hurricane. Sustained winds reached 79 miles per hour. Gusts climbed to 90. Waves were estimated at 35 feet. Modern simulations suggest some reach 38 feet, nearly 12 meters. On Lake Superior, a single wave struck the L. See? Waldo with an estimated height of 50 feet, smashing pilot house windows. Snow squalls created total whiteout conditions. Visibility dropped to 0. On Lake Huron, winds exceeded 60 miles per hour for 16 consecutive hours. Not 4, not 5, but 16 relentless hours on November 9th. In just 4 of those hours, 8 freighters sank. By November 10th, at least 12 ships were lost with all hands. More than 30 others were driven ashore or stranded. At least 273 sailors were dead. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in recorded Great Lakes history. And this was not a remote frontier. The Great Lakes were the industrial artery of North America. Formed by retreating glaciers more than 14,000 years ago, they contain roughly 21% of the world's surface fresh water. By the early 20th century, more than 1/3 of the total cargo capacity of the entire United States merchant fleet operated on these waters. Iron ore from Minnesota fed steel mills. Coal moved east. Grain, limestone, cement, salt, and potash flowed in immense volume. Entire cities depended on those shipments, but every season had a deadline. When winter ice sealed the harbors, shipping stopped. November voyages were races against freezing water. Deliver now, or wait months. Shipping companies demanded efficiency. Bulk freighters were loaded to maximum capacity. Gravity chutes poured ore and coal into steep mounds inside cavernous holds, often unevenly distributed. Many vessels were underpowered for their size, equipped with single triple expansion steam engines producing between 1,000 and 1,600 horsepower. Smaller engines cost less to build and consumed less fuel. Heavier loads meant greater profit. Captains felt the pressure. A ship in port earned nothing. Delays risked lost contracts. Caution could be mistaken for weakness. With limited forecasting tools, barometers and experience were often the only guides. In early November 1913, the weather had been unusually warm and calm. Temperatures reached into the low 70s in some regions. It felt as if time remained. It did not. When the white hurricane struck, it revealed more than the raw power of nature. It exposed the fragile balance between ambition and restraint, between steel hulls, economic urgency, incomplete warnings, and human expectation. In one violent convergence of air masses and human confidence, the margin disappeared. The Henry B. Smith was not an aging relic struggling through her final season. She was one of the largest and most powerful freighters on the Great Lakes. Built in 1906 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio, she measured 545 feet long, 55 feet wide, and displaced 6,631 tons. Powered by 2 Scotch Marine boilers feeding a single triple expansion steam engine, she turned one massive propeller through the inland seas. For 7 seasons, she had operated reliably. She was steel, modern, and respected. At her helm stood Captain James Owen. Owen was 54 years old in 1913 and had spent more than 36 years on the Great Lakes. He was not reckless. He was known for caution, for waiting out storms rather than gambling with lives. In another time, that restraint would have been unquestioned wisdom. But in 1913, caution did not always earn approval. The shipping season had been disappointing for the Acme Transit Company, the Smiths' owner. Weather delays meant late cargoes and frustrated management. Frustration turned into pressure. Before the Smith's final voyage of the season, Owen was reportedly given an ultimatum: deliver on time, or this would be his last year with the company. That was the weight he carried into November. On Thursday, November 6, 1913, the Henry B. Smith arrived in Marquette, Michigan to load iron ore. The plan was simple: take on approximately 10,000 tons and make one final run down Lake Superior toward Cleveland before winter ice closed the lakes. But as the Smith tied up, a storm was already building over western Lake Superior. Wind swept across the harbor. Snow fell. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Ore froze inside the gravity chutes feeding the holds. Dock workers had to climb into the icy chutes with sledgehammers to break the ore loose. Under normal circumstances, loading would have stopped. Owen insisted it continue. He wanted the ship ready the moment the weather allowed departure. Time was no longer neutral. It was an adversary. Loading dragged through Friday and into early Saturday. Even then, the Smith was not fully loaded. Normally, the dock crews would have returned Monday. Owen demanded they return Sunday, November 9th, to finish. Reluctantly, they did. By Sunday afternoon, the holds were filled with 10,000 tons of iron ore. To Owen, that heavy cargo may have seemed reassuring. A loaded vessel rides lower and can feel steadier than a light ship in rough seas. 7 seasons had proven her strength. That afternoon, the first storm system appeared to be moving east. To experienced sailors, it resembled a brutal but familiar 3-day blow. For a moment, it seemed the worst might be passing. At 4 p.m. on Sunday, November 9th, 1913, with northwest seas crashing against the Marquette breakwater, the Henry B. Smith eased out of harbor and into Lake Superior. Other captains stayed behind. Captain Charles Fox of the SS Choctaw judged the conditions too dangerous and remained in port. He watched the Smith depart and reportedly wondered how long it would be before she turned back. Through falling snow, observers saw the Smith's crew still securing her 32 hatch covers as she headed into open water. To face heavy seas without fully secured hatches was a grave risk. A single boarding wave could send thousands of gallons of water across the deck and into the holds. Shortly after clearing the harbor, witnesses saw the Smith make a sharp turn to port. She plunged deep into a trough between waves but managed to climb out. It is believed Owen quickly realized the storm was intensifying beyond expectations and may have attempted to seek shelter near Keweenaw Point. That was the last confirmed sighting. As evening fell on November 9th, a second storm system surged north and collided with the first. The result was the White Hurricane. Sustained winds exceeded 60 miles per hour for 16 consecutive hours on parts of the lakes. Gusts approached hurricane force. Waves reached 35 feet, with some possibly climbing to 38 feet or more. On Lake Superior, reports described waves near 50 feet. In such conditions, even a 545-foot steel freighter could become vulnerable. The Henry B. Smith never reached shelter. She never arrived at the Sulaks. No distress call was recorded. No immediate wreckage was found. All 25 men aboard were lost. Days later, fragments began to appear. The body of second cook Hiram R. Haskin was found floating 50 miles west of Whitefish Point. In the spring of 1914, the skeletal remains of 3rd Engineer John Gallagher were discovered on Isle Royale. They were the only 2 confirmed remains ever recovered. In June 1914, a bottle surfaced containing a message claiming the smith had broken in 212 miles east of Marquette, dated November 12th. Investigators dismissed it as a hoax, reasoning that the ship likely sank on the evening of November 9th or early November 10th. The bottle only deepened the mystery. For nearly a century, the Henry B. Smith remained missing. Then, in May 2013, shipwreck hunters, using side-scan sonar, located her approximately 30 miles north of Marquette, not far from where she had departed. The cold waters of Lake Superior had preserved her hull. She lay broken in 2 on the lake bed, her iron ore cargo scattered nearby. What happened? Only theories remain. One possibility is that the hatch covers were not fully secured when heavy seas began sweeping over the deck. If water entered the holds, the additional weight combined with shifting ore could have destabilized the vessel quickly. Another theory suggests structural failure. Under repeated impacts from 35 to 40-foot waves, the hull may have endured catastrophic stress and fractured. Once compromised, flooding would have been rapid and unstoppable. The wreck's condition, in a split in 2, supports the structural failure theory. But there were no survivors to confirm events. No final logbook entry explains the decisions made in those last minutes. We know only the result: a 6,631-ton steel freighter destroyed within sight of land, her crew gone in moments. And so the central question remains: was this solely a captain's decision? James Owen made the final call to leave port at 4 p.m. on November 9th. He understood November weather. He saw the snow. He felt the wind. Other captains waited. He did not. But decisions are rarely isolated. Behind him stood a company frustrated by delays. Behind the company were contracts and customers. Behind them was an industrial system dependent on iron ore arriving on schedule. Winter was approaching. The lakes would soon close. Every lost day meant lost revenue. Owen was a cautious man under extraordinary pressure. To remain in port might have ended his career. To sail offered a chance to redeem the season. In hindsight, the safer choice seems obvious. In the moment, with a storm that appeared to be moving east and decades of experience behind him, the calculation may have felt different. The Henry B. Smith did not sink in isolation. She sank where weather, engineering limits, economic pressure, and human judgment converged. Her broken hull, resting 30 miles from safety, is more than a relic of the White Hurricane. It stands as a monument to a system that demanded one final voyage. And in November 1913, that demand cost 25 lives. In early November 1913, the Great Lakes were crowded with steel. Freighters moved in steady lines across Superior, Michigan and Huron, racing the calendar. Winter was closing in. Ice would soon seal harbors and end navigation. Every captain knew the date as well as his compass. Every owner watched the ledger. Among those vessels was the Charles S. Price. Built in 1910, 504 feet long, and constructed entirely of steel, she embodied the new era of inland shipping. Riveted plate hull, modern engines, coal in her holds. She sailed Lake Huron with the confidence of a generation convinced that steel had conquered uncertainty. On board were ordinary men with ordinary ambitions. R.C. McIntosh, young and determined, saw the lakes as opportunity. Hard seasons meant advancement. Advancement meant security. For him, the Price was more than a freighter. It was a future. Her chief engineer, Milton Smith, had served faithfully. Yet days before departure, something unsettled him. Accounts suggest he stepped ashore before the vessel's final voyage. Whether instinct or coincidence, that choice spared him. The rest of the crew sailed on. Farther north, another ship prepared for her own final run of the season. The Regina, smaller at 1,956 gross tons, Canadian-owned and relatively new. She was commanded by Captain Edward McConkie, just 34 years old in his first full season of command. A wife and 2 young children waited at home. Like many November sailings, this voyage was meant to close the year. On Thursday, November 6, 1913, a low-pressure system formed over western Lake Superior. By Friday, storm warnings were posted. Winds rose. Snow began to fall. November gales were not unusual. Captains had endured them before. The Price continued across Lake Huron. Regina moved south from Superior into Huron. Like many that week, both operated under a familiar assumption. This was another hard blow, not history in the making. Saturday brought worsening barometers and intensifying snow squalls. Steel hulls pressed forward. Engines drove steadily. Cargo was secured. Confidence held. Sunday, November 9th, shattered it. A second storm surged north and collided with the first over Lake Huron. The systems merged and deepened rapidly. Sustained winds climbed to 70 to 79 miles per hour. Gusts exceeded 80. Hurricane-force winds persisted for 16 continuous hours in parts of the lake. Waves rose to 35 feet, with crests near 38. Some reports from Lake Superior described waves approaching 50 feet. This was no ordinary gale. On Lake Huron, the Charles S. Price entered the Whiteout. Snow erased the horizon. Ships could not see one another. Navigation depended on compass headings and instinct alone. Somewhere in that chaos, the Price encountered seas beyond her structural tolerance. No confirmed distress call was received. At the height of the storm, she capsized. When discovered later, the image stunned rescuers, a massive steel hull floating upside down near shore, keel exposed to the gray sky, superstructure crushed. A 504-foot freighter overturned in open water. It was identified as the Charles S. Price. Coal cargo likely shifted under relentless pounding. Stability vanished in seconds. Once inverted, survival was impossible. R.S. McIntosh and the entire crew were lost. While the Price met her end, Regina faced her own crisis. By Sunday afternoon, Regina was battling worsening conditions on Lake Huron. Observers later reported she appeared to ride unevenly, possibly top-heavy or imbalanced. In calm weather, manageable. In hurricane-force winds, fatal. Wind direction shifted abruptly. Waves struck from new angles. Holding course meant absorbing massive broadside impacts. Turning meant exposing her beam to breaking seas. Captain McConkey chose to turn toward the relative shelter of Michigan's shoreline near Port Sanilac. It was a calculated risk. Turning in breaking seas is among the most dangerous maneuvers at sea. For long seconds, a vessel presents her full side to towering waves. A single breaker can overwhelm stability. Visibility dropped to near zero. There was no radar in 1913, no electronic navigation, only compass bearings and dead reckoning. Near Port Sanilac, Regina struck submerged shoals. The hull was breached. Water flooded the holds. Pumps engaged, but were overwhelmed by 35-foot seas and hurricane winds. McConkey ordered abandon ship. Launching lifeboats in those conditions was perilous. Waves could smash them against the hull. Men could be thrown instantly into freezing water. Yet there was no alternative. Some reached boats. Others clung to debris. 20 did not survive. From shore came reports of a long, sustained blast from Regina's whistle. One drawn-out note cutting through wind and snow. A signal, a farewell. Captain McConkey remained aboard as long as possible. Whether intending to leave last or trapped by flooding, he did not survive. Regina broke apart and sank beneath Lake Huron. At the peak of the storm on November 9th, 8 ships went down within roughly 4 hours. Across the Great Lakes, 12 vessels were lost with all hands. At least 273 sailors died. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in Great Lakes maritime history. The Price and the Regina revealed 2 sides of the same truth. The Price symbolized industrial confidence, steel overturned by physics. Regina embodied human judgment under impossible pressure. A young captain choosing between deadly options in blinding snow. Both were modern. Both professionally commanded. Both overwhelmed by forces beyond design and experience. The lakes did not discriminate, not between youth and age, coal and cargo, Canadian registry or American steel. Wind speed and wave height were the only variables that mattered. For families in Cleveland, Sarnia, Detroit, and beyond, the storm translated into absence. Telegrams arrived. Names filled newspapers. Hope narrowed to lists of the missing. Milton Smith survived by stepping ashore. R. McIntosh did not. Captain McConkey vanished with his ship while trying to save his crew. When the storm loosened its grip on November 10th, one sight stunned rescuers, a massive steel hull drifting upside down off Lake Huron shore. It was quickly labeled the Ghost Ship. Days later, it was confirmed as the Charles S. Price. Along the Michigan shoreline, bodies washed ashore, some from the Price, others from Regina. Several were found in the same general area, close enough to suggest proximity in their final moments. Did they attempt rescue? Did they pass one another in the storm's blindness? No log survived to answer. Lake Huron kept that part of the story. As commercial traffic surged across the Great Lakes in the late 19th century, the ships that sailed them evolved into something fundamentally different from ocean-going freighters of similar length. They were not designed for blue water endurance. They were engineered for efficiency, to move massive quantities of raw materials across inland seas as cheaply and quickly as possible. By the 1860s and 1870s, North America's industrial expansion demanded unprecedented volumes of iron ore, limestone, coal, grain, salt, cement, gypsum, sand, slag, and potash. The lakes became the industrial artery supplying that growth. In 1869, one vessel redefined how it would be done. The R.J. Hackett. At 208 feet long and built of wood, the Hackett introduced a revolutionary layout. Instead of a single central superstructure, it separated the upper works into two deck houses. A pilot house, forward near the bow, for improved visibility, and an aft structure above the engine room. Between them stretched a long, unobstructed, box-shaped cargo hold. It was vast, accessible, and efficient. That design became the blueprint. Even as steel replaced wood in the early 1900s, Great Lakes freighters retained this distinctive configuration. Long, flat decks, forward pilot house, an enormous open cargo space. It maximized loading speed and volume, exactly what industrial America required. As demand increased, ships grew longer. The informal title Queen of the Lakes was awarded to the longest vessel afloat. On January 20th, 1900, the 497-foot John W. Gates held the title. By July 1911, it belonged to the 617-foot Colonel James M. Schoonmaker. The trajectory was clear: longer hulls, larger capacity, rising ambition, Schizoe. But size brought limitations. These freighters were built specifically for lake navigation. Their great length and relatively narrow beam made them efficient inland carriers, but ill-suited for open ocean survival. Many could not easily transit the narrower St. Lawrence channels to reach the Atlantic. They were optimized for trade, not extreme endurance. Optimization meant compromise. While their hulls were ideal for bulk cargo, their engines were comparatively modest. By 1913, a typical Great Lakes freighter used a single triple expansion steam engine producing between 1,000 and 1,600 horsepower. For ships stretching 500 to 600 feet and carrying thousands of tons, that output was economical but not powerful. 3 decades later, during World War II, American Liberty ships of similar size were equipped with engines generating about 2,500 horsepower. The technology to build stronger engines already existed in the early 20th century. But stronger engines cost more to construct. They consumed more fuel. They reduced profit margins. So smaller engines were chosen, sufficient for ordinary November gales, but not engineered for sustained hurricane force winds. Loading practices reflected the same economic logic. Bulk cargo was poured into holds through gravity chutes. Iron ore, coal, and grain cascaded downward, forming steep, pyramid-like mounds inside vast compartments. Proper leveling required time and labor. Under late-season pressure, cargo was often left uneven. This was not an unknown risk. Critics at the time openly questioned the safety of such methods, Uneven cargo raises a vessel's center of gravity and reduces stability. In calm weather, the imbalance may be negligible. In heavy seas, thousands of tons shifting even slightly can transform stability into catastrophe. By 1913, these structural realities defined the fleet. Long, boxy hulls built for volume, modest propulsion systems, gravity-loaded cargo vulnerable to shifting, and narrow margins for error. Then there was the weather. Forecasting in 1913 remained primitive. Storm warnings were communicated by flags and lantern signals. Barometers were read by hand. Telegraph lines carried fragmented updates. There were no satellites, no advanced models to predict rapidly merging low-pressure systems. Captains understood November risk, but they could not anticipate the unprecedented atmospheric convergence about to unfold. On the afternoon of Sunday, November 9th, 1913, captains on Lake Huron were already navigating punishing conditions. For 2 days, a powerful November gale had swept across Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. It was severe, but not unprecedented. To seasoned mariners, it felt like a typical late-season blow. Dangerous, yes, but survivable. What they did not know was that a second storm system was moving north. When it collided with the first over Lake Huron, the result would be sustained winds exceeding 70 miles per hour for up to 16 continuous hours. Waves would build to 35, 40, even 50 feet in isolated reports. Under those conditions, the fleet's built-in compromises became critical. Engines rated around 1,200 horsepower were suddenly forced to push 500-foot freighters against hurricane-force winds. Long, boxy hulls optimized for cargo efficiency endured relentless torsional stress as seas struck broadside. Holds filled with pyramids of ore or coal experienced violent internal shifting. The true enemy was not wind alone. It was duration. 4 hours of extreme weather can be endured. 16 hours pushes steel, rivets, frames, and stability to their limits. That is what November 9th became. For nearly 3 days, the storm had raged. Strong, punishing, but at first, within the experience of veteran captains, many continued northward, but by Sunday afternoon, a pattern shifted. One by one, captains realized this was no routine gale. It was escalating. Several chose to turn back toward the St. Clair River and the shelter of Port Huron. Aboard the 434-foot steel freighter HB, HAWGOOD, Captain A.C. May recognized he had misjudged the storm. Despite warnings, he had believed, as many did, that this was manageable weather. His ship was modern, steel-hulled, reliable, but as HAWGOOD passed Saginaw Bay, pressing north meant unnecessary risk. Seas were building, wind hardened. The horizon dissolved into white, May turned south. At the wheel stood 18-year-old Edward Caby, facing the fiercest storm of his life. HAWGOOD was riding light, making her unstable. She rolled so violently that May had to crawl across the pilot house to keep his footing. Caby gripped the wheel with straining arms, just to hold course. Visibility collapsed to near zero. Through blowing snow, May glimpsed other freighters still heading north. Charles S., Price and Regina. They were pushing into worsening chaos. At sunset, the storm transformed. The second system slammed into the first. ships that had turned south for safety suddenly found themselves steering directly into the storm's most violent quadrant. On the 500-foot Howard M. HANNA Jr., Captain William Hagen fought to maintain control in winds screaming above 70 miles per hour. He could not see his own bow. He estimated they were about 15 miles offshore near Point O'Bark, but with no landmarks visible, he could not be certain. Then a savage gust struck. HANNA was hurled between towering seas. The propeller repeatedly lifted clear of the water, destroying steerage. The ship was being driven toward shore. Through frost-covered glass, Hagen saw a flash, the beam of the Austin lighthouse, only a few hundred yards off the port bow. They were moments from disaster. He ordered both anchors dropped. The massive chains ran out, but wind and waves overpowered them. A breaker shoved the hull sideways onto the reef. HANNA grounded roughly 500 feet from the lighthouse. The storm did not relent. Crew members were separated between bow and stern. Windows shattered. Superstructure buckled. A hole opened near hatch 17, flooding compartments. The smokestack tore free and crashed into the aft cabin. All night the crew huddled inside and waited. They survived. Meanwhile, Captain May aboard HAWGOOD was still battling for control, searching desperately for the mouth of the St. Clair River. He feared they too were dangerously close to shore. He ordered anchors dropped. The chains paid out fully, sucked, but they dragged. May later estimated they were pulled nearly 8 miles before he abandoned the attempt and continued searching. At the wheel, Cabby fought exhaustion and fear. The pilot house lurched violently. Snow erased every reference point. Then May heard it. Not saw it, but heard it. Through the roar of wind came the unmistakable crash of breakers. They were nearing shore. "Hard to port," May shouted, ordering a sharp turn back toward open water. But Cabby understood the risk. Turning broadside into towering seas could capsize them instantly. Whether instinct or calculation, the 18-year-old disobeyed. He held course. The storm seized the freighter and drove her forward. HAWGOOD plowed straight into the sandy beach north of Port Edward. The impact threw men off their feet. May later said he was nearly hurled from the pilot house. The bow came to rest barely 100 feet from the Lake Huron House Hotel. At sunrise, stunned guests stepped outside to find a 434-foot steel freighter stranded in the sand. The crew had survived the night inside their grounded ship. In daylight, the truth was undeniable. Had they not grounded when they did, they likely would have sunk like so many others. May never publicly recorded whether he knew Cabby had disobeyed him, but he later admitted, if it had not been for that timely grounding on the beach, there would have been one more ship lost. Both HAWGOOD and HANNA suffered severe damage. Both were repaired and returned to service. Most importantly, every crew member survived. They were among the fortunate few. The Great Lakes storm of 1913 claimed at least 273 lives. Charles S. Price, Regina, Isaac M. Scott. Others vanished beneath the waves. May and Cabby were likely among the last to see some of those ships still afloat. The survivors carried that November with them forever. Some returned to the lakes. None forgot the white horizon or the sound of steel straining in the wind. white hurricane became legend, a new measure of November's fury. And for those who lived, one question lingered. Why did HANNA and HAWGOOD survive while Price and Regina were lost? Was it design, timing, instinct, luck? When you stand at the edge of death and walk away, what do you do with that second chance? Time is fragile. A single decision can divide survival from tragedy. All a sailor can do is return to the water and cherish the days granted between storms. Finally, thank you for staying with me through the story of November 1913, through the 70-mile-per-hour winds, the 35-foot waves, the 16 relentless hours on Lake Huron, and the lives of the 273 sailors who never came home. These stories matter because they remind us how thin the line is between survival and loss. If this journey moved you, I invite you to like, share, and follow the channel so we can continue exploring the untold chapters of maritime history together. I truly appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next episode here on this channel.